And they didn't want to let the Germans know what they were doing also, if you think about it. And so many of those people that died in that training disaster are, in fact, some of them are listed on the wall of the missing. Tony, could you go to that one, slide right before this one? Next slide. That one. Right behind those steps and that monument, you go down another set of steps, and there's a wall dedicated to the missing in Normandy. In other words, those are soldiers, like many of those 82nd and 101st Airborne soldiers who dropped in and landed in the sea. They were never found. More than 300, okay? The drop zone was so skewed that many dropped into the sea. They don't know what happened to them. They don't know where they are. They died. They drowned, obviously. You can imagine what a horrible death that was. But some of the people on the wall of the missing died in that training disaster, and they put them on the wall, and it was covered up. There was no doubt about it. It was several thousand soldiers died. Yes, sir.
Speaking of fiascos, would you like to comment on Operation Cobra, which is my father's first combat experience with being bombed by his own B-17s?
Yes. In fact, some of you know where McNair Barracks is, right? Or heard McNair here in Washington, D.C. It's named after, he was basically the father of the organization of the World War II Army. You're talking about the breakout, okay, which was going to occur in July and August. Believe it or not, we had massed so many forces, they decided that they'd even set up bleachers so people like McNair and others could watch the attack. And during that time period, there was supposed to be a wave of bombers. 2,500 bombers were going to come and just clobber the countryside in front of the attack, and then the soldiers were going to move forward with little resistance. That was the plan. The problem was the bombs were dropped short, okay? Including right in the bleachers, okay? And we're talking about hundreds or thousands of soldiers who were bombed, getting ready to kick off the attack during that time period. So you talk about friendly fire, that's probably the greatest case. McNair himself, okay, was killed. He was one of the major generals of the World War II Army, and McNair Barracks, again, in Washington, D.C. is named after him. Okay, he's buried, I should say, we think he's buried there, because they didn't recover that much of any of the soldiers, unfortunately, that were hit by bombing, but they did find McNair's watch, okay? And so he was only one of the many casualties you're referring to with that short bombing during the breakout phase. Yes, ma'am?
Would you say a few words about the Matchbox fleet of the Coast Guard at D-Day?
I don't know that much about the Matchbox fleet. I know that they're on the wall of the missing though. Surprisingly, a lot of people are surprised that there are a number of Coast Guard soldiers on that, and there are a number of Coast Guard soldiers buried in the cemetery. I have to confess, I don't know that much about the Matchbox fleet. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Could you make some comments about the 29th Division?
The 29th, the Blue and Gray? The Blue and Gray Division was kind of there as much for political reasons as for other reasons. And here's why. The big red one was on the left flank at Omaha, and the Blue and Gray, the 29th Division, was on the right flank. It's called the Blue and Gray because most of the soldiers were from Maryland or Virginia. Most of the regular infantry soldiers, and therefore it was called the Blue and Gray Division, a nickname that referred to the Civil War at that time, Maryland and Virginia. And the 29th was a reserve National Guard division. It wasn't a regular army. And that was a political decision, and I think a good one, by the president, FDR at the time. He wanted a regular army division on one of the beaches, and he wanted to show what a citizen soldier division of soldiers that weren't necessarily professional soldiers but had been brought into the arms of the United States through the draft and things like that, and particularly as volunteers in the Blue and Gray Division could do and could fight effectively. And so, and they bear some of the most brutal of the fighting and take tremendous casualties. That whole piece on Saving Private Ryan, that's part of the Blue and Gray Division. The Bedford Boys from Virginia are part of those Virginia units that are there. Maryland and Virginia units, and there are many, many monuments to the Blue and Gray Division there in the Beerville Gap area, which is where they attacked, and one of the most difficult of the areas to attack. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the children were brought out to honor the American sacrifice, and they put flowers on the grave.
Yes, French children.
Yes. On what occasions do they put the flowers? Is that organized or is it spontaneous?
It's, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. It's, I'm part of the Friends of this association, and we do that mostly during the month of June. It's organized commemoration which happens, so we read texts, and so we sing the anthems, and we have the flags, and so we put rocks, which are rocks of remembrance, with flowers, and so it's mostly during the month of June, and all the kids, I mean, you have, I think the youngest is 6 years old.
Yeah, 6 years, yeah.
I think the youngest of the association is 6 years old, and so it's between 6 and maybe 30 years.
But it's not necessarily just schools. They have many organizations like the Westlake, Association that are there to remember. But schools also, you'll see that at Omaha Beach at the Colville Cemetery, you'll see many, many French school groups constantly coming to the cemetery.
When I was in middle or high school, I went to the beaches with my history teacher. It was like one of the one-day excursions. We go there, we talk about it, and we go there and we have like a little speech about it, and so it's really. Because we're young, and they tell us, okay, now you're free to walk on this beach, but you're not allowed to talk or
To be reverent. They want you to be reverent.
Yes, yeah. It's a very, it's incredible, again, what the French people, even today, do. And again, especially being part of the Alexandria Camp sister city thing, it's good to remember that. Yes, sir.
I was there in the 1st of May, and I was impressed by how many families, French families were there, and they're very reverent, and you could see they were talking to the children about the losses and everything.
Exactly.
I was very impressed because
Yes.
I had been in Paris before, and
Right. It's a little bit different. I like to compare it sometimes to going to New York City and going out to, farm country in Wisconsin. It's a little bit different. I'm not saying one is better, but I'm just saying it's different.
No, one is better.
I think one of the most commemoration is like on the D-Day, and I know that they're doing something tomorrow, and the first commemoration starts, there is one at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think, and so we're here at 6 o'clock and we read texts and incidents and in front of the beach, looking, and the children are here, and so that's like the most important one, and we have one on the evening too, when
And they'll wade out into the water, they'll throw a wreath out into the water. There's all kinds of ceremonies. She's talking about the one at Juno Beach, and I've seen them all. They're just like one thing after the other. It's just amazing that the French do this every single year. There is not a year that goes by where there's not total remembrance, of sacrifice. The soldiers that were in this battle know, I'm sure, somewhere that they were appreciated.
kids really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're really aware.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the Allied command structure and how Eisenhower managed to hold everything together?
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, let me just mention that in 1943, if you would have guessed who's going to lead the invasion, it wouldn't have been Eisenhower, okay? Eisenhower was an operations component. He was here at the Pentagon doing a lot of operations work and then being sent to Great Britain. And so he's a very well-known general by this time. By the way, he was MacArthur's aide in the Philippines in the 1930s as a major, when MacArthur was like a, 2- and 3-star general. During the campaign in the 1950s, they asked MacArthur what he thought of Eisenhower. He said he'd make a good clerk. Of course, he was running for the nomination. But getting back to your question, Marshall and everybody else, including Stalin, thought Marshall was going to be picked to command, and Eisenhower was picked only because FDR told George Marshall, he said, I couldn't sleep a night if you weren't with me in Washington, and that's why George Marshall didn't lead the invasion. Eisenhower was chosen. Eisenhower is a very difficult job, and he has a difficult job mainly because of 2 men, okay? Montgomery, Bernard Law Montgomery, the commander of the British forces, the victor at El Alamein, okay? Now, we can go into all reasons why he wanted El Alamein, and I see Tony smiling back there, because he could probably talk about this very well also. But Montgomery had gained some fame, okay, during that time period, and so he was a personality, and he also always thought that he was right, okay, and that he knew more than anybody else, okay. Some people don't